Alright guys, welcome back to Underground Science, and in this video we're going to be talking about orotic aciduria. Alright, so this goes back to the pyrimidine synthesis pathway, so we can just go over that real quick. We don't have to go over each and every byproduct or what enzymes being used or any of that. Let's just go over what's produced in each step real quick. So remember, we start with glutamine and CO2, and we make carbamoyl phosphate. Then with that we make carbamoyl aspartate. Then with that we make dihydroorotate, right? And then, so remember, we already did pyrimidine synthesis in a previous video, so make sure to go check that out. But after dihydroorotate, remember, after that we made orotic acid. Okay, and orotic acid was converted to oritidine monophosphate via orotate phosphoribosyl transferase, right? Because we used a PRPP group in this reaction. We combined PRPP with orotic acid and we made oritidine monophosphate, or OMP, via orotate phosphoribosyl transferase. And then remember, OMP was converted to UMP via OMP decarboxylase. And then we said one important thing to keep in mind is that orotate phosphoribosyl transferase, this enzyme, and OMP decarboxylase, both of these enzymes make up the UMP synthase enzyme. Okay, so in orotic aciduria, what happens is you have a deficiency in this enzyme, where you have a defect in a gene that codes for this enzyme. Okay, so you have a deficiency in this enzyme in orotic aciduria. And now let's go talk more about what happens in this disease. So just to start off with, it's important to note for exams, right, that orotic aciduria is an autosomal recessive condition. So what that means is, like, let's say you have one chromosome from mom and then one chromosome from dad, right? And let's say this is your UMP synthase gene right here. Or let me do it in a different color. Let's say we have our UMP synthase gene here, right? These two. So autosomal recessive means you need both of these genes, or you need both of your copies to be mutated. Okay, so you need the gene from your mom to be mutated, and you need the gene from your dad to be mutated in order to have this disease. Okay, if this was autosomal dominant, you would only need one of the copies to be mutated. All right, but this is autosomal recessive, so you need both copies of the UMP synthase gene to be mutated. Okay, so that's orotic aciduria. It's autosomal recessive. And if we look at the name, right, it's orotic aciduria. Okay, so the urea part means that we're going to have orotic acid present in our urine, okay, or orotic acid crystals present in our urine. All right, so again, just by looking at this, it's orotic aciduria. So this urea part tells us that we're going to have orotic acid in our urine, or orotic acid crystals in our urine. And then another thing you can see, or you can tell by looking at this disease and knowing that this is a UMP synthase defect or deficiency, is that, remember, UMP, let's go to the previous slide, right? Remember, UMP synthase did what? It made UMP, right? And then remember what UMP went on to make is it's important for making, right? Remember, we made our pyrimidine. So we made thymine, and then we also made cytosine, right? And of course, uracil, because uridine monophosphate. So what I should say is we went on to make DTMP, remember, which is important for DNA synthesis. We made DCMP and CTP, for example, right? So that's important also for DNA synthesis and RNA synthesis. And then UMP itself is important for RNA synthesis, right? Because we need uracil to make RNA. So if you cannot make UMP, right, because UMP synthase is deficient, or you have a defect in this gene that makes it not possible to even have UMP synthase, right, that means you won't be able to make or synthesize UMP. So if you can't synthesize UMP, then you can't make, your pyrimidines like thymine, cytosine, and uracil. So that's that, right, for UMP synthase deficiency. So that's what we mean by you cannot make your pyrimidines if you're deficient in UMP synthase. And so if one is deficient in, if you cannot make DNA, or if you cannot properly synthesize DNA, I should say, right? We're going to talk about anemia in a future lecture, but just know, like, if you can't synthesize DNA properly, then that puts you more at risk for megaloblastic anemia. And what's megaloblastic anemia? This is a type of, so like, we're going to talk about this later again, but we have macrocytic anemia, right? So we have microcytic, normocytic, and macrocytic anemia. So one of those anemias, again, is macrocytic anemia. And macrocytic anemia just means that your red blood cells, the size of your red blood cells are more than 100 femtoliters, okay? And so you just have big red blood cells. That's macrocytic anemia. But a type of that is megaloblastic anemia, the other type being non-megaloblastic anemia. Okay, megaloblastic anemia means in your bone marrow, okay, you have immature precursor red blood cells, okay? So if we drew your, like, a little bone thing right here, right, you have, that's a horrible bone drawing, but in here you have your immature precursor red blood cells, okay? So let's say you have your immature precursor red blood cells. That in your bone marrow is going to be way bigger than usual. So these are called megaloblasts. They're just huge immature precursor red blood cells that are in your bone marrow. Okay, so these are called megaloblasts. And so you're going to obviously have megaloblasts and megaloblastic anemia, and you're also going to have just normal big red blood cells that are greater than 100 femtoliters in your bloodstream, right? And any sort of anemia, we know that usually that's characterized by decreased red blood cells, which means decreased, oxygen delivery to your tissues. So in megaloblastic anemia, the patient may also have fatigue and weakness. All right, so that's important to know. And then another part of orotic aciduria is that we already talked about this, but if it's just a good review real quick, is that, remember, it's a deficiency or defect in UMP synthase, which is why you can't go on to make your pyrimidines. If you can't make pyrimidines, remember, you cannot synthesize your DNA properly, which again ties back into the fact that that'll lead to big red blood cells, right, greater than 100 femtoliters, and megaloblasts that are present in your bone marrow. All right, so that's good to know. And then one other thing that we should know in orotic aciduria is that what if I give folate, right, or vitamin B12? Because usually, remember, well, again, we're going to talk about this in our anemia lecture, but a deficiency in B12 or folate, right, a deficiency in B12 or folate is also a reason to get macrocytic anemia. So this could be a cause to getting macrocytic anemia. So what if you you found out this was a macrocytic anemia and then you gave B12 and folate? Would that be good? Right? And so one thing you'll see if it's orotic aciduria is that this won't fix the problem. Okay, so it won't fix the macrocytic anemia problem. Won't fix the underlying macrocytic anemia because the macrocytic anemia is not because of a folate deficiency or a B12 deficiency. It's because of a UMP synthase deficiency, so you're not making or synthesizing you're not properly synthesizing DNA, okay? So that's why giving folate or vitamin B12 to someone who has orotic aciduria won't really fix their macrocytic anemia, because it's not the folate deficiency or B12 deficiency that's causing their red blood cells to be, more than 100 femtoliters. It's the fact that they can't properly synthesize DNA that's causing their red blood cells to be more than 100 femtoliters, which is leading to macrocytic anemia. All right, so last thing that we need to talk about is a few more things on orotic aciduria. Because DNA synthesis, right, proper DNA synthesis is really important for just overall growth. You'll see a decreased growth, so that's important to keep in your mind. Another thing is that, remember, in your bone marrow you also have white blood cells, right? And cells in general just need proper DNA synthesis in order to divide and proliferate. So if you don't have that, you may not have proper B cell and T cell proliferation, right? So that can lead to immunodeficiency. So again, that can maybe put you more prone to infections. And then one important thing that we need to keep in mind is that we won't see an elevated ammonia level, blood ammonia levels. we won't see elevated blood ammonia levels because this isn't an ornithine transcarbamylase deficiency, okay? Because that's an important distinction to make, because an ornithine transcarbamylase deficiency is relating to urea cycle. And we'll talk about the urea cycle in a future video, but just to mention a few steps, remember in the urea cycle, right, we have ammonia, carbon dioxide, and ATP. We take that and we make carbonyl phosphate, okay? So we take ammonia, carbon dioxide, and ATP, and we make what? Carbonyl phosphate, right? Via carbonyl phosphate synthetase type 1, okay? Because remember, type 2 is in the pyrimidine synthesis pathway. Then we take carbonyl phosphate and we make citrulline, okay? By doing what? We add ornithine in this reaction. And this whole reaction is done by ornithine transcarbamylase, okay? If one is deficient in this enzyme, right, which we'll talk about in a future video also, because it relates to the urea cycle, you cannot decrease your ammonia levels, because remember, the whole point of the urea cycle is to take ammonia and convert that to urea, right, which is less toxic, and then you pee the urea out. So what happens is you convert ammonia to urea, right, in your liver. You convert ammonia to urea in your liver, and then you take urea and then that goes to your kidneys, and then you pee that out, right? That goes into your urine, or the urea goes into your urine. But what happens is, if you're deficient ornithine transcarbamylase, then you cannot convert carbonyl phosphate, right? You cannot convert carbonyl phosphate into citrulline. So that means carbonyl phosphate levels will start to build up. Okay, so you're going to have increased carbonyl phosphate levels. Then your body's going to try to shunt this into the pyrimidine synthesis pathway, remember? So carbonyl phosphate will then start getting converted. Remember, that gets converted to carbonyl aspartate, right? Which we've already been through this, but let's just write it down really quick. Carbonyl aspartate. And then remember, this will soon get converted into, this can get converted to dihydroorotate, then from dihydroorotate into orotate, right? Which is also what? So instead of that, we can write, so let's go and get rid of that real quick. What does it convert into? Carbonyl aspartate, remember? That gets converted to dihydroorotate. And then from there, we can convert dihydroorotate into orotic acid, right? So see, we're going to have an increased orotic acid level if we're talking about orotic aciduria, and we'll have increased orotic acid levels if we talk about ornithine transcarbamylase deficiency, right? But the only difference is here in ornithine transcarbamylase deficiency, right, when we're talking about the urea cycle, not only will we have an increased orotic acid level, we'll also have an increased ammonia level, because we cannot take the ammonia and convert to urea, because this enzyme, right, ornithine transcarbamylase, is not working. So along with increased orotic acid levels, we'll also have increased ammonia levels when we're talking about ornithine transcarbamylase deficiency, not when we're talking about UMP synthase deficiency as we see in orotic aciduria. All right, so that's what I mean by we don't have increased ammonia levels in our blood when we're talking about orotic aciduria, but we do have increased ammonia levels in our blood when we're talking about ornithine transcarbamylase deficiency. Okay, but we'll go over the urea cycle and ornithine transcarbamylase deficiency into more depth in our future videos when we talk about like more into biochemistry and metabolism. But for now, that was an important distinction to make between orotic aciduria and ornithine transcarbamylase deficiency. All right, so that's basically it for orotic aciduria. I hope you liked the video, and hope to see you guys in my future videos where we'll talk more about the purine salvage pathway and more. All right, thanks for watching.